The crack of a whip echoed through the night, followed by a woman's muffled cry. In Copper Creek, folks pretended not to hear. They pulled their curtains tighter, turned away, and whispered to their children that some things weren't meant to be questioned. Sheriff Wade Blackwood kept order in these parts after all, and if his new bride sometimes appeared with bruises hidden beneath high collars and long sleeves, well, marriage had its hardships on the frontier. But Elizabeth Montgomery had never planned to be anyone's victim, and the path that would lead her from prisoner to survivor began on the coldest night of 1878, when a wounded Lakota warrior collapsed at her feet as she fled into the wilderness. Two lost souls with nothing left to lose, a desperate alliance that would defy the unwritten rules of the Dakota Territory. This is their story. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The year was 1878, and the Dakota Territory remained a place where fortunes could be made or lost on a single turn of luck. The railroad had finally reached this far west, bringing with it the promise of prosperity and the certainty of change. Eastern newspapers painted the frontier as the last great adventure, a place where a person could remake themselves far from the shadows of the past. Elizabeth Montgomery believed those stories. At 23, she had already endured enough. Heartache for 3 lifetimes. The war had taken her father, consumption had claimed her mother, and the financial panic of 73 had stolen what little security remained. When her uncle's creditors seized their Boston home, Lizzie made her choice with clear-eyed determination. She would answer an advertisement for teachers needed in the Western Territories. The journey west had stripped away her city refinements one by one. Her once fashionable traveling dress grew threadbare, her gloves thinned at the fingertips, and the elegant coil of her auburn hair loosened with each passing mile. By the time she stepped off the train in Copper Creek, Dakota Territory, Lizzie looked every bit the frontier woman she was becoming, practical, resilient, and unadorned. The town itself seemed to have sprung from the dirt without plan or purpose. A single muddy street connected a hodgepodge of wooden structures: the general store, a saloon, a small white church, and scattered houses in various states of completion. On that first day, as Lizzie stood clutching her single valise, the wind cut through her coat with knife-like precision, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. "Miss Montgomery." A woman approached, her face weathered but kind. "Martha Wilkins. I run the general store. We've been expecting you." Martha's warm welcome offered Lizzie her first genuine smile in months. The townspeople had pooled resources to build a small schoolhouse, and Martha proudly showed her the simple structure at the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 4 walls, a wood stove and rough-hewn benches. But to Lizzie, it represented everything she had come west to find: purpose, independence, and the chance to build something meaningful. "The children will start coming Monday," Martha explained. "Mostly from the families in town, but some ride in from homesteads. Winters get harsh, so expect fewer when the snow comes." That first week passed in a blur of chalk dust and eager young faces. Lizzie found herself rising before dawn to prepare lessons, often working by lamplight until her eyes burned. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt the tight knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. This hardscrabble town might never be home, but it offered something she needed: a fresh start. It was on her second Saturday in Copper Creek that Sheriff Wade Blackwood first appeared at the schoolhouse door. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and eyes the cold gray of gunmetal, he cut an imposing figure against the afternoon light. The silver star pinned to his black coat gleamed as he removed his hat. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of a man born further south. "Thought it was high time I introduced myself properly. I'm Sheriff Blackwood." Something in his appraising gaze made Lizzie straighten her spine. "A pleasure, Sheriff. I'm just finishing up here. I've heard good things about your teaching." He stepped inside without invitation, his spurs jingling against the wooden floor. "Not many educated women venture this far west. You're something of a curiosity." "I'm just doing the job I was hired for," Lizzie replied, gathering papers with deliberate movements. The sheriff smiled, though the expression never reached his eyes. "I'd be honored if you'd join me for supper tonight. As the town's law enforcement, I make it my business to know all the citizens under my protection." It wasn't a request. Lizzie recognized the tone of a man accustomed to obedience, but her options were limited. Refusing the most powerful man in Copper Creek within her first weeks would be unwise. "That's very kind," she managed. "What time? Shall I arrive?" The sheriff's house stood apart from the rest of town, a two-story structure with glass windows and a wraparound porch that spoke of prosperity beyond what most in Copper Creek could claim. Inside, Lizzie found herself seated at a polished table laden with food far finer than the simple fare she'd grown accustomed to. "You must wonder how a lawman affords such comforts," Blackwood remarked, noting her surprise. "Let's just say I have investments in the region's future." That first dinner established a pattern. Every Saturday, the sheriff would appear at the schoolhouse door. Every invitation felt less like a request and more like a command. The townspeople noticed, of course. Whispers followed Lizzie through the general store. Parents began to regard her differently when they dropped off their children. "He's never shown interest in any woman before you arrived," Martha confided one afternoon, her voice low. "Some might consider you fortunate. The sheriff protects what's his." The emphasis on that last word sent a chill through Lizzie's bones. By her third month in Copper Creek, the sheriff's intentions became unmistakable. He began leaving gifts, a new hat, a bolt of fine fabric, a silver hairbrush that must have cost a month's wages. Each offering came with the same message. Everything had its price on the frontier, including, it seemed, her independence. "You can't keep refusing him," Clara Thompson, the midwife's assistant and Lizzie's only friend, warned her. "Men like Blackwood don't understand the word no." "I didn't come west to be any man's possession," Lizzie replied, though her voice held less conviction than before. The harsh realities of frontier life were eroding her Boston-bred ideals day by day. The situation came to a head on a blustery March evening. Lizzie had just dismissed her students when Reverend Parker appeared at the schoolhouse, his expression grave beneath his gray beard. "Miss Montgomery, I must speak with you on a matter of some delicacy." The Reverend's news fell like hammer blows. The town council, influenced heavily by Sheriff Blackwood, had voted to discontinue funding for the school after the spring term. The official reasons cited dwindling resources, but the message was clear. Lizzie's continued employment depended entirely on the sheriff's goodwill. "He's a powerful man with powerful friends," Reverend Parker said gently. "And while I don't approve of his methods, he's kept order in a territory where chaos is always just one bad season away." That night, alone in her small rented room, Lizzie faced the stark arithmetic of her situation. Her savings would not cover a return journey east. Teaching positions in other frontier towns were scarce, especially mid-year, and the Dakota winter had taught her that principles made for cold comfort against starvation. When Sheriff Blackwood called the next day with his ultimatum disguised as a proposal, Lizzie understood she had been outmaneuvered from the moment she stepped off the train. "You need protection in this world, Elizabeth," he said, not bothering. "To kneel. I can provide that. As my wife, you'll want for nothing." Lizzie thought of the quiet desperation in Martha's eyes when she spoke of the sheriff. She thought of the bruises she'd glimpsed on the arm of Silas Jenkins, the deputy who flinched whenever Blackwood entered a room. She thought of the Lakota, families she'd seen being forced from their traditional hunting grounds. the sheriff supervising with his hand resting casually on his gun. "And if I refuse?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Blackwood's smile was all teeth. "Then I'm afraid Copper Creek will no longer be able to accommodate you. The stage leaves Wednesday. It's a dangerous journey alone." 3 weeks later, Elizabeth Montgomery became Mrs. Wade Blackwood in a ceremony that felt more like a funeral than a wedding. The town turned out in their Sunday best, offering congratulations that rang hollow against the church walls. Only Clara dared to grip her hand and whisper, "Survive, whatever it takes." Life as the sheriff's wife quickly revealed the man behind the badge. Blackwood ruled his home as he did Copper Creek, through fear and absolute control. Lizzie's possessions were catalogued, her movements monitored, her conversations reported by a network of informants eager to curry favor with the sheriff. The first time he struck her was over a dinner served cold. The second time came after. She spoke too long with a young cattle driver passing through town. By the third instance, Lizzie had learned to move silently through the house, to anticipate his moods, to make herself invisible when the whiskey bottle emptied too quickly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You brought this on yourself," he told her after one particularly brutal night, watching dispassionately as she pressed a cold cloth to her swollen cheek. A wife should know her place. Summer faded into autumn, and with each passing day, Lizzie felt pieces of herself disappearing. The woman who had crossed half a continent chasing independence now jumped at shadows. The teacher who had inspired children to dream beyond their circumstances now kept her eyes downcast in public. But beneath the obedient exterior, something essential remained unbroken. Each night, after Blackwood succumbed to sleep, Lizzie would silently open her small traveling desk, the one possession he'd dismissed as worthless, and write in a journal hidden in its false bottom. Sometimes she recorded the day's events, sometimes memories of Boston, but most often she drafted letters she knew she would never send. "Dear Clara," she wrote one October night, her hand still trembling from that evening's violence. "I am plotting my escape. I would rather die free than live another day like this." The opportunity came unexpectedly during the first snowfall of the season. Blackwood had ridden out with his deputies to investigate reports of Lakota hunters trespassing on ranchland claimed by one of his business partners. He wouldn't return until morning. Lizzie moved quickly, gathering only what she could carry, a change of clothes, the money she'd secreted away coin by coin, a small knife stolen from the kitchen. She knew the risks. A woman alone in the wilderness faced dangers from nature and man alike. The nearest town was 40 miles away, across terrain that had claimed experienced travelers in better weather. But as she stepped into the snowy night, pulling her woolen cloak tight around her shoulders, Lizzie felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. The darkness embraced her as she skirted the edge of town, avoiding the saloon where Blackwood's informants might spot her. The snow fell in fat, silent flakes, quickly covering her tracks, a blessing and a curse. It would hide her trail from pursuers, but could also blind her to the path ahead. Lizzie had studied the surveyor's map in her husband's office enough times to know her best chance lay northeast, following Silver River through the pass at Black Pine Ridge. If she could reach Fort Harrison, she might find protection, or at least passage on a military supply wagon bound east. The first hours of freedom passed in a blur of exhilaration and terror. Each snapping twig became the sound of pursuit. Each shadow held potential dangers. But as the town fell farther behind, her steps grew more confident. The cold bit at her cheeks and numbed her fingers, but Lizzie welcomed the pain as proof that she was still alive, still fighting. By midnight, the snowfall had intensified. The moon, when it occasionally broke through the clouds, cast an eerie, blue glow across the landscape, transforming familiar terrain into something alien and treacherous. Lizzie paused to catch her breath beneath a towering pine, her legs burning from trudging through deepening drifts. That's when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of horses, multiple riders, moving fast despite the weather. Blackwood must have returned early, discovered her absence, and rallied his men. Panic surged through her veins as she abandoned the relative safety of the trail, plunging deeper into the forest where the horses couldn't easily follow. Branches tore at her cloak and scratched her face as she ran blindly through the underbrush. The riders' voices carried on the wind, growing closer with each passing minute. She couldn't have gotten far in this weather. Blackwood's voice, edged with rage. "Find her, $5 to the man who brings her back." Lizzie stumbled down an embankment, losing her footing on the icy slope. She tumbled painfully over rocks and exposed roots before landing at the bottom, the wind knocked from her lungs. For a moment she lay there gasping, certain that this was the end of her bid for freedom. Then she saw him. A figure moved through the trees, barely visible in the swirling snow. Not one of Blackwood's men. This person moved differently, soundlessly, seemingly part of the forest itself. As the shape drew closer, Lizzie could make out a man dressed in buckskins and furs, his long black hair adorned with a single feather. A Lakota warrior. Their eyes met across the clearing, hers wide with fear, his dark and inscrutable. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the shouting from above grew louder, and the warrior tensed, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. That's when Lizzie noticed the blood staining the snow beneath him, the awkward way he held his left arm against his side. He was injured, possibly fleeing the same men who pursued her. In that moment of shared danger, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Without words, Lizzie pointed to a dense thicket nearby, then to the approaching riders. The warrior hesitated, sizing her up with a gaze that seemed to cut through pretense. Then he nodded once, a barely perceptible dip of his chin. Together, they slipped into the shadows as Blackwood and his men crashed through the forest above. Them, united by the most primal of bonds, survival. And in that snowy wilderness, with death hounding their steps, Elizabeth Montgomery's true journey was just beginning. Dawn arrived with painful slowness as Lizzie and the wounded Lakota warrior huddled beneath the thick branches of a fallen pine. The snowfall had finally ceased, leaving a pristine white blanket covering their tracks. In the pale morning light, Lizzie got her first clear look at her unexpected companion. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps only a few years. Older than her own 23 years, his copper skin was drawn tight across high cheekbones, and dark eyes regarded her with a mixture of pain and wariness. Blood had soaked through the sleeve of his buckskin shirt, where Lizzie had helped bind the wound with strips torn from her petticoat. "I'm Elizabeth," she said, gesturing to herself, unsure if he understood English. "Lizzie." The warrior studied her face for a long moment before responding. "Two hawks." His voice was low and rough with pain, but his English clear enough. Lizzie nodded, relief washing over her that communication wouldn't be impossible. "Your arm. How badly are you hurt?" Two hawks grimaced, shifting slightly against the tree trunk. "Bullet, not deep." He gestured toward the direction they'd come from. "Your people?" "The sheriff," Lizzie confirmed, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "My husband." Something flickered in Two Hawks' expression. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "You run from husband?" Lizzie's hand unconsciously rose to touch her cheek, where a fading bruise still lingered. "Yes." Two Hawks nodded once, accepting this without judgment. He glanced toward the lightening sky. "They will come again, with dogs." The thought sent a chill through Lizzie that had nothing to do with the winter cold. Blackwood was known for his tracking skills and his relentlessness. He would never allow his wife to escape, not when he had made it clear she was his, a property to do with as he pleased. "We need to keep moving," she said, already gathering her small bundle of possessions. "Can you walk?" Two Hawks rose in answer, moving with a fluid grace despite his injury. He swayed slightly, steadying himself against the pine with his good hand, but his eyes remained clear and alert. Without a word, he reached for his knife, a beautifully crafted blade with a bone handle, and handed it to Lizzie. She hesitated, surprised by the offering. "You're giving me your knife?" Two Hawks shook his head. "Lending. You may need." His eyes met hers, solemn and direct. "I trust you not to use on me." It was a gesture that spoke volumes, coming from a man whose people had every reason to distrust a white woman. Lizzie accepted the knife with equal gravity, tucking it into the pocket of her cloak. "Which way?" she asked. Two Hawks considered, surveying the terrain with an expert's eye. "North. There is a place. Old cabin. Trappers used long ago. 1 day's walk. Your people, won't they be looking for you?" A shadow passed over his face. "My brother Running Fox will search, but others." He trailed off, his expression hardening. "I left camp against elders' wishes, to hunt land that once was ours." Lizzie understood the unspoken implication. Two Hawks had defied his tribe's leadership, risking confrontation with white settlers by hunting on contested territory. His own people might not be eager to welcome him back until tempers cooled. They set off northward, Two Hawks setting a pace that balanced urgency with caution. Lizzie found herself struggling to match his natural ease in the wilderness. Every step required deliberate placement to avoid sinking too deeply into the snow. Her city-bred lungs burned in the cold air, and her legs, accustomed to the schoolroom's confines, protested the unaccustomed exertion. Two Hawks noticed her difficulty, but made no comment. Instead, he occasionally paused, ostensibly to check their surroundings, allowing her precious moments to catch her breath. As they trudged through the pristine landscape, Lizzie's thoughts turned to the events that had led her to this point. The memory of her wedding night rose unbidden, Blackwood's rough hands tearing at her clothing, his breath hot with whiskey against her neck, his contemptuous laughter at her tears. "A wife's duty," he'd sneered, pinning her wrists above her head. "Best get used to it." Each night that followed had brought new humiliations, new lessons in powerlessness. Blackwood seemed to take particular pleasure in breaking her spirit, inch by inch, day by day. "Penny for your thoughts." Two Hawks' voice pulled her back to the present. Lizzie blinked in surprise, both at the interruption and the colloquial phrase that sounded odd coming from him. "You speak English very well." A hint of something that might have been amusement touched his lips. "Government school. 4 years. They tried to make me forget Lakota ways." His hand drifted to a small medicine pouch at his waist. "They failed." "I'm sorry," Lizzie said, the inadequate words tumbling out before she could stop them. Two Hawks gave her a sidelong glance. "For what? You did not build the school. For all of it. For what my people have done to yours." He walked in silence for several steps before responding. "My grandfather says when you meet a good snake, you do not apologize for the one that bit yesterday." He shrugged his good shoulder. "You are not your husband." The simple absolution left Lizzie speechless. How strange that this man, whom everything in her upbringing had taught her to fear, showed more humanity than those who claimed to be civilized. By midday, the weak winter sun had done little to warm the air, but their exertion kept the worst of the cold at bay. Two Hawks led them through dense pine forests where the snow lay shallower, avoiding the open meadows where they might be spotted. Occasionally, he would stop to study tracks in the snow, deer, rabbit, fox, reading the wilderness like Lizzie might read a book. "How far to the cabin?" she asked during one such pause, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger that had been her constant companion since fleeing Copper Creek. "Before dark," Two Hawks replied, frowning slightly as he examined a set of large paw prints. "Wolf, hunting." Lizzie felt her pulse quicken. "Is that a problem?" "Not for us, unless hungry pack." He straightened, adjusting the small pack of supplies at his waist. "We should move faster." As they pressed on, the terrain grew more challenging. The gentle slopes gave way to steeper inclines as they approached the foothills of Black Pine Ridge. Lizzie's legs trembled with exhaustion, and her breath came in ragged gasps. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, Two Hawks held up a hand, signaling her to stop. He stood perfectly still, head tilted slightly, listening. Lizzie strained her ears, but heard nothing beyond the soft whisper of wind through pine branches. "What is it?" she whispered. Instead of answering, Two Hawks moved swiftly to a nearby fallen log and began clearing away snow, revealing a hollow space beneath. "Hide," he instructed, urgency in his voice. Lizzie didn't hesitate. She crawled into the cramped space, drawing her knees to her chest as Two Hawks covered the opening with branches and snow, leaving just enough gap for air and a sliver of visibility. Minutes later, she heard what his more experienced ears had detected earlier, the distant baying of hounds, the faint jingle of tack, men's voices carried on the wind. Blackwood's search party. Through the small opening, Lizzie watched as Two Hawks melted into the forest with practiced ease, his movements so fluid and silent that even knowing where he had gone, her eyes struggled to track him. He was using himself as a decoy, she realized, leading the hunters away from her hiding place. Time stretched endlessly as Lizzie huddled in her cramped sanctuary, every muscle tensed for discovery. The sounds grew closer, men's voices clearer. Now, horses snorting in the cold air. She recognized Deputy Jenkins's nasal whine, another voice belonging to Tom Sullivan, the blacksmith whose debts to Blackwood had purchased his loyalty. "Tracks split here," a gruff voice announced. Blackwood, the sound of her husband's voice sent ice through Lizzie's veins. "Jenkins, Sullivan, follow that trail north. Carson, you're with me heading east. $5 to whoever finds her first. 10 if she's unharmed." The unspoken implication hung in the air. What would happen to Lizzie if she were found harmed was of less concern than bringing back Blackwood's property intact. "What about the Indian tracks, Sheriff?" Carson asked. "Likely one of those. Lakota troublemakers from the Silver River camp," Blackwood replied dismissively. "Army can deal with them. My wife is our priority." "Looks like they might be traveling together," Jenkins suggested, earning what sounded like a slap from Blackwood. "You suggesting my wife would willingly consort with a savage?" Blackwood's voice dropped dangerously. "Choose your next words carefully, Deputy." No, sir. Just observing the tracks." "Then observe them heading north like I told you. And if you find that Lakota dog with her, shoot him." The search party split up, the sounds of horses and men fading in different directions. Still, Lizzie remained frozen in her hiding place, fear keeping her immobile long after silence had returned to the forest. When Two Hawks finally appeared, sliding silently back through the trees, the shadows had lengthened considerably. He cleared away the concealing branches and offered Lizzie his hand. Her limbs had stiffened in the confined space, and she winced as blood rushed back into her cramped muscles. "They are gone?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "For now, following false trails." There was a new tension in Two Hawks' bearing, a heightened alertness. "We must reach cabin before dark." They set a punishing pace, Two Hawks occasionally supporting Lizzie's elbow when she stumbled on the increasingly rocky terrain. The afternoon shadows stretched longer, the temperature dropping noticeably as the weak winter sun began its descent. Just as twilight was bleeding the color from the landscape, they crested a small rise, and two hawks pointed to a structure nestled among a stand of pines below, the trapper's cabin. It was little more than a crude shack, really. Logs stacked and chinked with mud, a sagging roof, a single small window covered with an animal hide. But to Lizzie's exhausted eyes, it might as well have been a palace. Two hawks approached cautiously, circling the structure before determining it was abandoned. The door creaked on leather hinges as he pushed it open, revealing a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and a platform bed filled with ancient, mouldering straw. Not pretty, two hawks observed, but walls stop wind. Lizzie almost laughed with relief, stepping into the relative warmth of the enclosed space. It's perfect. While two hawks secured the door and window, Lizzie took stock of their shelter. Previous occupants had left behind a few rusted tools, a dented cooking pot, and a stack of firewood beside the hearth, treasures beyond price in their situation. "We can have fire?" she asked, eyeing the woodpile hopefully. Two hawks considered, weighing the risk of smoke against the danger of freezing. Small fire after full dark. As night fell in earnest, two hawks skillfully built a small, nearly smokeless fire in the hearth. The meager warmth it provided felt like a luxury after their day in the bitter cold. In its flickering light, Lizzie properly examined his wounded arm for the first time. The bullet had gouged a deep furrow across his upper arm, tearing through muscle but missing bone. Though painful, it wasn't life-threatening if they could prevent infection. Lizzie cleaned the wound as best she could with melted snow, wishing for the herbs and tinctures she'd learned to use from Clara Thompson during her months in Copper Creek. "How did this happen?" she asked as she worked, partly to distract him from the pain, partly from genuine curiosity. Two hawks' expression darkened. "Hunting deer on Silver River lands, where my grandfather's grandfather hunted. Rancher saw me. Shot without warning." "The same rancher who reported to Blackwood?" Two hawks nodded grimly. "Garrett has biggest ranch. Takes more land each season. Pushes my people further from hunting grounds." Lizzie recognized the name. Walter Garrett, one of Blackwood's closest allies and business partners. The two men controlled nearly everything in Copper Creek and the surrounding territory through a combination of legal maneuvering, intimidation, and outright violence. "My husband," Lizzie began, then corrected herself. "Blackwood helps him take your land. Sheriff makes papers. Says land belongs to Garrett now." Two Hawks' voice held no self-pity, only a stated fact. "Government men agree. Lakota must move again." The simple statement contained generations of betrayal and loss. Lizzie finished bandaging his arm in thoughtful silence, using the last clean strips of her petticoat. "There," she said finally, tying off the improvised bandage. "It's not much, but it should help." Two Hawks examined her handiwork, then nodded in approval. "Good hands. Steady." The compliment warmed her more than the fire. For so long, her only value in Blackwood's eyes had been her appearance and her status as his possession. To be appreciated for actual skill felt almost foreign. "What will you do now?" Two Hawks asked, settling back against the wall. "Where will you go?" It was the question Lizzie had been avoiding since her escape. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back east. I have nothing there anymore. And Blackwood's influence reaches far in these territories." "Fort Harrison?" Two Hawks suggested, naming the military outpost that represented the nearest semblance of law beyond Blackwood's reach. Lizzie shook her head. "The commander there is Blackwood's friend. They served together in the war." Her options were painfully limited. "I thought perhaps I could reach Bismarck. It's a larger town. I might find work teaching, lose myself in the crowd." Two Hawks didn't immediately respond, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. When he spoke, his words surprised her. My people leave soon. Go north, many days' journey. Winter camp at Spirit Lake. They're abandoning their lands. Just like that, a flash of anger crossed his features. Not abandon, never abandon. But winter comes, children hungry, soldiers threaten. We go north now, return when grass grows. His expression softened slightly. White woman could travel with us? No one. Look for you there. The offer stunned Lizzie. Your people would accept me. Not all, Two Hawks admitted candidly. Some elders remember too many broken promises, but my grandmother is medicine woman, has influence. If she says you stay, you stay. It was a possibility Lizzie had never considered, seeking refuge among the very people she had been taught to fear. The irony wasn't lost on her, yet where else could she go that Blackwood wouldn't eventually find her? I would be grateful, she said finally, but would your grandmother accept me? Why would she help a white woman? Two Hawks regarded her steadily. Grandmother says judge person by actions, not father's blood. He gestured to his bandaged arm. You help me, not because I am Lakota or not Lakota, because I am wounded. This she will understand. Exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed Lizzie, the events of the past 24 hours crashing down upon her. Her eyes grew heavy, her thoughts increasingly disjointed. Two Hawks noticed and gestured toward the platform bed. Sleep. I will watch. Lizzie wanted to protest that he needed rest as well, especially with his injury. But her body betrayed her. She managed to stagger to the crude bed, pulling her cloak tightly around her. The ancient straw mattress crackled beneath her weight, but in her exhaustion, it felt softer than the feather bed in Blackwood's house. Two Hawks, she murmured, already drifting towards sleep. Thank you. His response followed her into dreams. Pilamaya, thank you. For knife. He patted the bone-handled blade she had returned to him. Good to know who to trust when wolves circle. Lizzie slept deeply, but woke with a start, sometime in the darkest hours of the night. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. The unfamiliar ceiling, the hard mattress beneath her, the dying embers casting faint red light across rough-hewn logs. Then memory returned in a rush. The escape, the forest, two Hawks. He sat by the door, his profile outlined against the faint glow from the hearth, alert and watchful. Sensing her gaze, he turned. Bad dreams? He asked quietly. Lizzie nodded, though it had been sudden wakefulness, not nightmares that had roused her. Do you never sleep? Later. Moon is wrong for sleep now. She wasn't entirely sure what he meant by that, but didn't press. Instead, she asked the question that had been nagging at her since they'd first encountered each other in the snow. Why did you trust me? You could have left me for Blackwood's men to find, or used me as a hostage. Two Hawks considered her, question with the same seriousness he seemed to apply to everything. Saw your eyes, he said finally, eyes that know fear, but not surrender. Like cornered wolf, dangerous, but not mean-spirited. He offered what might have been the ghost of a smile. Also, Blackwood is devil, enemy of my enemy, his friend. It was the most words he had strung together at once in their brief acquaintance, and Lizzie found herself smiling in response. That's very pragmatic. Pragmatic, he repeated, as if testing the word. Government school taught many words, not all useful for hunting. A thought occurred to Lizzie. What's your real name? Not your English name. Two Hawks looked surprised by the question. After a moment's hesitation, he replied, Setan Nunpa. He pronounced it with a musical cadence that Lizzie couldn't quite capture in her mind. Setan Nunpa, she attempted, mangling the pronunciation terribly. Two Hawks winced but nodded encouragingly. Close enough. They fell into companionable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the night pressed against the cabin walls. Hours later, as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Two Hawks suddenly tensed, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. "What is it?" Lizzie whispered, instantly alert. He held up a hand for silence, head cocked slightly as he listened to something beyond Lizzie's perception. Then she heard it too, the distant whinny of a horse. "Blackwood," she breathed, panic clawing at her throat. Two Hawks shook his head, moving silently to the window. He peered through a small gap in the hide covering, then relaxed visibly. "Not Blackwood. My brother." Relief washed over Lizzie, followed immediately by apprehension. What would Two Hawks' brother think of finding him in a remote cabin with a white woman, the sheriff's wife no less? Two Hawks seemed to read her thoughts. "Running Fox will not harm you, but be careful. His heart is bitter toward white people, with reason." Before she could ask what he meant, Two Hawks had slipped outside to meet his brother. Lizzie moved to the window, watching as a tall figure dismounted from a paint horse at the edge of the clearing. The family resemblance was immediately apparent, though Running Fox was broader, more heavily muscled than Two Hawks, his face set in harder lines. The brothers spoke in rapid Lakota, too low and fast for Lizzie to discern the tone, let alone the content. Running Fox gestured sharply toward the cabin several times, his expression growing increasingly agitated. Two Hawks responded with characteristic calm, his hands moving in placating gestures. Finally, Running Fox's shoulders slumped in what appeared to be resignation. He reached into a pouch at his waist and handed something to Two Hawks. "Medicinal herbs," Lizzie guessed, noting the careful way Two Hawks tucked them into his own medicine bag. After a few more exchanged words, Running Fox mounted his horse again. Before departing, he looked directly at the cabin window where Lizzie stood watching. Even from a distance, the intensity of his gaze sent a chill through her. It contained no personal malice, but something deeper and more implacable. The collective memory of broken treaties, stolen lands, and slaughtered innocents. A judgment not of her specifically, but of everything she represented. Then he was gone, vanishing into the forest with the same fluid grace his brother possessed. Two Hawks returned, carrying a small bundle that Running Fox had left, pemmican, a spare knife, and what looked like a carefully folded garment of some kind. "He is not happy," Two Hawks said, understating what had clearly been a heated exchange. "But he will tell grandmother we come." "He doesn't want me among your people," Lizzie observed. It wasn't a question. Two Hawks didn't deny it. Running Fox's wife and daughter died of white man's disease last winter. Army brought blankets, brought sickness too. He placed the bundle on the table. "But he respects grandmother's wisdom. If she says you come, he will accept." The simple statement contained layers of grief and resilience that left Lizzie momentarily speechless. How could she blame Running Fox for his bitterness? How many more like him had suffered losses that no one bothered to record in the history? Books that lionized westward expansion. "When do we leave?" she asked finally. Two Hawks glanced at the lightening sky. "Now. Blackwood's men will search again with daylight. We go north, meet my people at Spirit Lake." Lizzie gathered her meager possessions, mentally preparing herself for another day of difficult travel. As Two Hawks checked the cabin one final time, erasing all evidence of their presence, she found herself contemplating the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been Elizabeth Montgomery, educated daughter of a respectable Boston family, whose greatest adventure had been reading novels by lamplight while her mother slept. Now she was a fugitive, fleeing an abusive husband, placing her trust in a Lakota warrior about to embark on a journey into a world so far removed from her upbringing that it might as well be another country entirely. Yet strangely, she felt more alive, more truly herself than she had in years. Two Hawks appeared at her side, ready to depart. "Afraid?" he asked, noting her expression. Lizzie considered the question honestly. Yes, she admitted, but not of your people. I'm afraid of what happens if Blackwood finds us. I'm afraid of failing, of the cold, of wolves. She met his gaze directly. But I'm not afraid to try. Two Hawks nodded, satisfaction in his dark eyes. Good answer. Fear keeps you alive. Panic kills. He gestured toward the door. Come, long journey waits. As they stepped outside into the crisp dawn air, Lizzie cast one final glance at the cabin that had sheltered them. Humble as it was, it had been a turning point, the place where her future had pivoted from despair toward possibility. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with the same determination that had brought her this far. Not as Sheriff Blackwood's possession, but as Elizabeth Montgomery, a woman finding her own path through the wilderness. Spirit Lake emerged from the white landscape like a vision from another world, nestled between towering pines and sheltered by rocky outcroppings that blocked the worst of the wind. The Lakota winter camp sprawled along the frozen lakeshore. Smoke rose from conical tipis, arranged in a large circle, their hides painted with symbols Lizzie couldn't decipher. Children bundled in furs darted between dwellings, their laughter carrying across the snow. Dogs lounged near fires or trotted, alongside women hauling water from a hole cut in the lake's ice. The journey had taken 4 grueling days. Lizzie and Two Hawks had traveled mostly at night, resting during daylight hours in whatever shelter they could find. Caves abandoned, hunting blinds, once even the hollow trunk of a massive fallen oak. They had subsisted on the pemmican running fox had provided. Supplemented by a rabbit, Two Hawks had somehow managed to snare despite his injured arm. Each day, Lizzie had felt Copper Creek and her old life receding further into the distance. Each night had brought new lessons in survival: how to walk silently through snow, how to read the stars for direction, how to preserve body heat when the temperature plummeted. Two Hawks proved a patient teacher, his laconic instructions delivered with quiet authority. Now, standing at the edge of the forest overlooking the camp, Lizzie felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. The sight of so many Lakota, at least 20 teepees, which meant perhaps 100 people, made her previous courage waver. What had seemed sensible in the isolation of their flight now felt like madness. How could she possibly expect to find sanctuary among people who had every reason to reject her? Two Hawks sensed her hesitation. "My grandmother's teepee is there," he said, pointing to a dwelling slightly larger than the others, decorated with an intricate pattern of stars. "She waits for us." "How do you know?" Lizzie asked, surprised. "Running Fox told her she has prepared." There was quiet certainty in his voice, a faith in his grandmother's acceptance that Lizzie couldn't share. "What if the others object? What if they demand I leave?" Two Hawks considered this. "Some will object," he acknowledged. "But grandmother is wise one." Her voice carries weight. Before Lizzie could respond, a shout went up from the camp. They had been spotted. Several men moved quickly in their direction, hands on weapons, faces set in wary expressions. Running Fox was among them, distinguishable even at a distance by his height and broad shoulders. Two Hawks stepped forward, raising his hand in greeting. He called out something in Lakota, his voice carrying across the crisp air. The approaching men slowed but didn't lower their weapons. "Stay behind me," Two Hawks murmured to Lizzie. "Let me speak first." Running Fox reached them first, his dark eyes flicking from his brother to Lizzie with poorly concealed disapproval. "You bring the white woman to our winter camp," he said in English, clearly intending Lizzie to understand, "even after our talk." "Grandmother said to bring her," Two Hawks replied evenly. "Grandmother has not seen what I have seen." Running Fox's voice hardened. White promises mean nothing. White gratitude lasts until they want what we have. The other men had formed a loose circle around them, expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. One, an older warrior with a scar running from temple to jaw, spat on the ground near Lizzie's feet. "Sheriff's woman," he said in heavily accented English, "bring trouble to our people." Lizzie fought the urge to step back. Instead, she straightened her spine, meeting the man's gaze directly. "I am not the sheriff's woman. I fled from him." This caused a ripple of surprise among the men. The scarred warrior laughed harshly. "White woman leaves white husband, brings white husband's anger to Lakota. Same story, different day." Before two hawks could respond, a commanding voice called out from behind the gathering. The men parted immediately, revealing a woman of indeterminate age walking steadily toward them. Despite the cold, she wore only a simple dress of soft hide decorated with intricate beadwork, a fur robe draped casually over her shoulders. Her face was deeply lined, yet her posture remained straight, her movements fluid and purposeful. Two hawks inclined his head respectfully. "Grandmother." The old woman's gaze swept over him, lingering on his bandaged arm before shifting to Lizzie. Her eyes were so dark they appeared black in the winter light, sharp with an intelligence that seemed to cut through pretense. Lizzie felt herself being thoroughly assessed in that single look. "So," the woman said in perfect, unaccented English, "this is the one Running Fox spoke of, the woman who tends wounds instead of causing them." Lizzie blinked in surprise, both at the fluent English and the unexpected description. She glanced at two hawks, who offered the barest hint of a shrug. "I told Running Fox how you helped," he explained. "Grandmother listens well." The old woman, Two Hawks' grandmother, though she looked too vital to fit Lizzie's image of grandmothers, made a small gesture toward the camp. "I am Singing Star. You will come to my teepee. There is much to discuss and the day grows cold." It wasn't a request. Running Fox opened his mouth as if to protest, but Singing Star silenced him with a single stern look. "The council will speak later. For now, this woman is my guest." The matter settled, she turned and began walking back toward the camp, clearly expecting them to follow. Two hawks nudged Lizzie gently. "Come, when grandmother walks, others follow." The camp seemed to ripple with tension as Lizzie walked through it. Women paused in their tasks to stare. Children were hurriedly ushered inside teepees, and men gathered in small groups, watching with undisguised suspicion. Only Singing Star appeared unaffected by the stir, moving with serene confidence toward her dwelling. The interior of the teepee was surprisingly spacious and warm. A small fire burned in a central pit, its smoke rising toward an open flap at the peak. Hides and woven blankets covered the ground, and bundles of dried herbs hung from the lodge poles. Various containers crafted from hide, wood, and birch bark were arranged neatly around the perimeter. It was a space that spoke of order and purpose, much like its owner. "Sit," Singing Star instructed, indicating a place beside the fire. As Lizzie settled herself awkwardly on the ground, the old woman turned to Two Hawks. "Your arm needs tending." The white woman's binding was good, but infection begins. Two Hawks didn't argue. He shrugged out of his buckskin shirt, revealing the wound that had indeed begun to show angry red streaks radiating from beneath the makeshift bandage. Singing Star worked quickly, unwrapping Lizzie's handiwork and examining the bullet graze. With clinical detachment, she spoke rapid Lakota to a young girl who appeared at the teepee entrance, sending her scurrying off on some errand. Then she turned her attention to Lizzie. "You ran from your husband," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Lizzie confirmed. "Why?" The directness of the question caught Lizzie off guard. In her former life, such personal matters were approached obliquely, if at all. but she sensed that anything less than complete honesty would doom her chances with this perceptive woman. "He beat me," she said simply, repeatedly. "I was his possession, not his wife." Singing Star nodded, unsurprised. "And when my grandson found you?" "He was wounded. I helped him. He helped me hide from the search party." The girl returned with a wooden bowl containing a pungent mixture. Singing Star took it without comment and began applying the paste to Two Hawk's wound. "And now you seek shelter among those your husband would kill without hesitation." Lizzie swallowed hard. "I have nowhere else to go." Singing Star worked in silence for several minutes, bandaging Two Hawk's arm with a clean strip of hide. When she finished, she wiped her hands on a cloth and fixed Lizzie with that penetrating gaze again. "My people have little reason to trust white faces," she said finally. "Your kind make promises with forked tongues. The Great Father in Washington sends men who speak of peace while sharpening their knives." "I understand," Lizzie replied softly. "I'll go if—" Singing Star held up a hand, cutting her off. "I did not say you must leave. I said trust must be earned." She gestured to Two Hawks. "My grandson sees something in you worth preserving. That carries weight." Hope flickered in Lizzie's chest. "What must I do to earn that trust?" A hint of approval flashed in the old woman's eyes. "First, understand your place here. You are not white woman or sheriff's wife here. Those identities you left behind in the snow. Here, you are simply one who seeks shelter, one who must contribute." "I can teach," Lizzie offered. "Reading, writing, numbers." Singing Star made a dismissive gesture. "Those skills have value, but not immediate need. Can you tan hides, sew clothing, prepare pemmican for journey?" Lizzie's silence was answer enough. "As I thought," Singing Star said, not unkindly. "You will learn these things. Work alongside our women. Prove your worth through actions, not white men's knowledge." It was a humbling proposition, to start again as a novice in the most basic skills of survival. Yet Lizzie recognized the wisdom in it. What good was her Boston education here, where life itself hung on practical abilities she had never needed to develop? "I'll learn whatever you'll teach me," she said with genuine humility. Singing Star studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, apparently satisfied. "You will stay in my teepee until the council decides. Some will oppose your presence. Their voices deserve respect." "When will the council meet?" Lizzie asked. "Tonight after evening meal." Singing Star rose with surprising grace for one of her years. "Rest now. Later, there will be work enough." With that, she departed, leaving Lizzie alone with Two Hawks. He settled himself more comfortably by the fire, the medicinal paste already easing the pain in his arm. "Your grandmother speaks excellent English," Lizzie observed, still surprised by that discovery. Two Hawks nodded. "Mission school, like me. Longer ago, she learned white man's words to understand white man's ways." A wry smile touched his lips. "Says know your enemy's thoughts." "Am I the enemy here?" Lizzie asked quietly. Two Hawks considered the question with characteristic seriousness. "To some, yes. To others, not yet decided." He gestured to the camp beyond the teepee walls. "My people have seen many promises broken, many treaties signed, then ignored when gold or land or buffalo become more important." The simple statement contained generations of betrayal. Lizzie felt the weight of a history she had been insulated from her entire life. Her education had celebrated westward expansion, painted pioneers as heroes bringing civilization to savage lands. Never had she been taught to consider the perspective of those being civilized against their will. "I understand their distrust," she said honestly. "I'd feel the same in their position." "Good start," Two Hawks replied. "Understanding comes before trust." True to Singing Star's word, Lizzie found little time for rest that day. Shortly after their conversation, a middle-aged woman named Grass Dancer arrived to put Lizzie to work. Without ceremony, she handed Lizzie a bone scraper and led her to where several women were processing a freshly killed deer, demonstrating the proper technique for removing flesh from the hide. It was messy, physically demanding work. Within an hour, Lizzie's arms ached and her hands were raw despite the borrowed mittens Grass Dancer had provided. The other women worked with practiced efficiency, their movements economical and precise. They spoke little to Lizzie directly, though she caught occasional glances and whispered comments she couldn't understand. One younger woman, perhaps 18 or 19, showed more openness than the others. She positioned herself near Lizzie and occasionally corrected her technique with gentle adjustments to her grip or angle. When Lizzie thanked her, she smiled shyly. "I am Swift Fox," she said, in halting English, "Two Hawks' cousin." That connection explained the girl's relative friendliness. Lizzie caught herself, remembering Singing Star's words about leaving old identities behind. "I'm Lizzie," she amended. Swift Fox nodded, seeming to approve of the shorter, less formal name. "Lizzie," she repeated, the Z sound slightly elongated in her pronunciation. "You work hard, good." It was a small thing, that approval, but it warmed Lizzie more than she expected. By the time the winter sun began its early descent, she had earned, if not acceptance, then at least a measure of respect from the women she worked alongside. Even Grass Dancer, initially stern and critical, had nodded with grudging approval at Lizzie's perseverance. "Not useless," the older woman pronounced, which Lizzie gathered was high praise indeed. As twilight deepened into true darkness, the camp gathered for the evening meal. Cooking fires blazed higher, and people congregated in family groups, sharing food from communal pots, a rich stew of venison and wild roots, supplemented with dried berries and flat bread. Singing Star beckoned Lizzie to join her, Two Hawks and several others who appeared to be family members. Running Fox was among them, his expression still guarded but less openly hostile than earlier. Beside him sat a boy of perhaps 10, studying Lizzie with undisguised curiosity. "My son, Eagle Feather," Running Fox said when he noticed Lizzie's glance. There was both pride and sorrow in his voice. Pride in his son, sorrow for the wife and daughter no longer beside them. Lizzie nodded respectfully to the boy, who quickly looked away, suddenly shy. The gesture reminded her so much of her young students in Copper Creek that a pang of wistfulness shot through her. She wondered what they had been told about her disappearance, what stories Blackwood had concocted to explain his wife's sudden absence. Conversation during the meal was conducted primarily in Lakota, with occasional translations offered by Two Hawks or Singing Star when they deemed something relevant to Lizzie. She was content to observe, noting the easy camaraderie among family members, the efficient division of tasks, the clearly defined roles that nonetheless seemed to carry equal respect. As the meal concluded, Singing Star rose and spoke briefly to the gathered family. Whatever she said caused a ripple of reaction, some nodding agreement, others looking concerned. Two Hawks leaned toward Lizzie. "Council begins soon," he explained. "Grandmother says you should attend. Unusual for outsider, but she thinks important for you to hear." "Will I be expected to speak?" Lizzie asked, anxiety suddenly knotting her stomach. "Only if asked. Council is for listening first, speaking when invited." The council gathered in the largest tipi belonging to a dignified elder named Standing Bear. Space inside was arranged with furs and sitting mats forming a circle around a central fire. Lizzie noted that participants seemed seated according to some hierarchy she didn't fully grasp, with Singing Star and several older men and women nearest the entrance. Younger leaders like Running Fox positioned opposite, and various other tribal members completing the circle. Two Hawks guided Lizzie to a spot slightly behind Singing Star, indicating she should sit quietly. The positioning was deliberate, Lizzie realized, placing her under Singing Star's protection while acknowledging her outsider status. The proceedings began with the ritual passing of an elaborately decorated pipe, which each council member smoked before passing to the next. Lizzie observed the solemnity with which this was conducted, recognizing it as far more than mere ceremony. It was a binding of the participants to truthful and honorable discourse. Standing Bear spoke first, his deep voice resonating in the enclosed space. Though Lizzie couldn't understand his words, his gestures toward her made clear she was the primary topic of discussion. Others followed, some speaking at length, others offering brief comments. The tone varied from measured to impassioned, particularly when Running Fox rose to speak. "What are they saying?" Lizzie whispered to Two Hawks during a brief pause. "Many things," he replied softly. Standing Bear reminds of traditional hospitality to those in need. Running Fox warns of danger you bring. Others speak of practical matters, food supplies, whether you take more than you give. A particularly heated exchange arose between Running Fox and an older woman whose elaborate beadwork identified her as someone of importance. Their back and forth grew increasingly intense until Singing Star intervened, her calm voice cutting through the tension. "She speaks of you now," Two Hawks murmured as his grandmother addressed the council. "Says you fled injustice, helped her grandson despite risk. Says woman who defies cruel husband might understand Lakota struggle better than most whites." Lizzie felt a rush of gratitude toward the old woman who had so unexpectedly become her advocate. The debate continued, with opinions seeming evenly divided between those who saw her presence as a dangerous liability and those willing to extend cautious acceptance. Finally, Standing Bear turned to Lizzie directly. "White woman," he said in careful English, "you have heard our words, though perhaps not understood all. Now council would hear your voice. Why should Lakota people risk safety for sheriff's wife?" Every eye in the teepee turned to Lizzie. The silence pressed down like a physical weight as she gathered her thoughts. This was the moment her fate would be decided. False humility or empty promises would not serve her here. Only absolute truth had any chance of winning their trust. "I cannot undo what others of my race have done to yours," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I cannot promise that my presence brings no danger. Sheriff Blackwood is a vengeful man who sees me as his property. If he learns I am here, he will come with men and guns." A murmur ran through the assembly at this frank admission. Running Fox's expression darkened further, but Standing Bear merely nodded, appreciating her honesty. "What I can promise is this," Lizzie continued. "I will work without complaint. I will learn your ways with an open heart. I will never betray your trust or location to anyone." She paused, meeting Standing Bear's gaze directly. "And if my presence ever threatens your people's safety, I will leave without argument, even if it means facing Blackwood alone." Singing Star translated these words for those whose English was limited. When she finished, an elder, with a deeply lined face and milky clouded eyes spoke up. Two Hawks leaned close to translate. "Sees far, says even blind man can judge truth in voice. Says you speak straight, not crooked like most whites." Standing Bear raised his hand for silence. "Council has heard much. Now we must decide. White woman will wait outside." Two Hawks escorted Lizzie from the teepee into the crisp night air. Stars blazed overhead with a brilliance she had never witnessed in the east, their cold light casting the snow-covered landscape in silver and shadow. The temperature had dropped sharply, and Lizzie shivered despite her borrowed fur wrap. "Did I say the right things?" she asked anxiously. Two hawks considered. Truth is always right path. Council values honesty above smooth words. But will they let me stay? He gazed toward the teepee, where animated voices could be heard rising and falling. Hard to say. Many factors weigh. They waited in silence for what seemed like hours, but was probably less than 30 minutes. Finally, Singing Star emerged, her expression giving nothing away. "Come," she said simply. Inside, the council had rearranged itself slightly. Standing Bear gestured for Lizzie to stand before him. The gravity in his face sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter night. "Lakota people have spoken," he announced. "Some with caution, some with welcome, all with truth." He paused, his dark eyes assessing Lizzie one final time. "Council says you may stay until spring thaw. You will work, learn our ways, respect our customs. When snow melts, Council will decide again." Relief flooded through Lizzie so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. "Thank you," she managed. "I won't disappoint your trust." Standing Bear raised a cautioning hand. "There are conditions. You do not leave camp alone. You do not speak of our numbers or weapons to any outsider. And," here his expression grew stern, "if Sheriff comes, you must go with him. We will not risk war for one woman." The conditions struck Lizzie like a physical blow, but she understood its cold logic. These people had survived by making hard choices, by prioritizing the tribe's welfare over individual desires. She could hardly expect them to risk everything for someone who had been among them for mere hours. "I understand," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice, "and I accept your terms." Standing Bear nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Then it is decided. Until spring thaw, you are under Singing Star's protection. Learn well, work hard, and perhaps Council will see differently when decision comes again." The gathering dispersed, council members filing out into the night. Some nodded to Lizzie as they passed, others avoided her gaze entirely. The division of opinion remained clear, but for now at least, acceptance had won a narrow victory. Singing Star approached, something like approval in her lined face. "You spoke well," she observed. "No promises you cannot keep. Good beginning." "Thank you for advocating for me," Lizzie replied. "I know it wasn't an easy position to take." The old woman shrugged. "Easy paths teach nothing. Hard paths build strength." She gestured toward her teepee. "Come. Morning starts early. Much to learn." As they walked through the sleeping camp, Lizzie found her gaze drawn to the vast starlit sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the sheltering mountains, Blackwood was surely still searching, his rage growing with each passing day. The thought sent a familiar spike of fear through her heart, but it was duller now, tempered by distance and the fragile promise of sanctuary. For the first time since fleeing Copper Creek, Lizzie allowed herself to consider a future beyond mere survival. Not a return to her old life, that path was forever closed to her, but something new, something built. From the ashes of who she had been, like the phoenix in the mythology books of her childhood, perhaps she too could rise, transformed from the flames of her past. Singing Star seemed to sense her thoughts. "Bravery is not absence of fear," the old woman said quietly. "It is action, despite fear. Remember this in days to come, you will need it." With those prophetic words hanging in the night air, they ducked into the welcoming warmth of the teepee, leaving the stars to their silent vigil and the wilderness to its ancient dreams. Weeks passed, and winter tightened its grip on Spirit. Snow piled in deep drifts against the teepees, and ice thickened on the lake until it could support the weight of an entire hunting party. The days grew shorter, the nights bitterly cold. Yet within this frozen landscape, Lizzie found herself slowly thawing, shedding the rigid constraints of her former life like a snake casting off old skin. Under Singing Star's guidance, she learned the essential skills of Lakota winter life. Her hands, once soft and suited only for turning pages and writing on chalkboards, grew calloused and strong. She learned to process hides until they became supple as cloth, to weave intricate patterns in porcupine quill work, to prepare food that would sustain life through the harshest months. Each morning before dawn, she rose to help the women break ice for water. Each evening, she joined in the communal preparation of meals. Between these bookends of the day, she worked alongside Swift Fox, who had appointed herself Lizzie's unofficial tutor in all things Lakota. Like this, Swift Fox would demonstrate, her nimble fingers moving with practiced precision. See? Not so hard. It was always harder than Swift Fox made it look, but Lizzie persevered. Gradually, reluctant respect replaced outright hostility among many in the camp. She was still viewed with suspicion by some, Running Fox chief among them. But fewer backs turned when she approached, and occasionally children would venture close to examine her auburn hair with fascinated curiosity. Two hawks came and went during these weeks, often leaving before dawn and returning after dusk. He and other hunters ranged far in search of game to supplement the tribe's winter stores. The harsh season had driven most animals into hibernation or migration, making each successful hunt a cause for celebration. When present in camp, two hawks maintained a respectful distance from Lizzie, their interactions limited to brief exchanges about practical matters. Yet she often caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something beyond mere curiosity or assessment. The day that marked 1 month since her arrival at Spirit Lake dawned clear and brutally cold. Lizzie had just finished helping with the morning water collection when Singing Star approached her, 2 pairs of snowshoes in hand. "Today you learn to walk on snow," the old woman announced, offering no further explanation. Lizzie accepted the unfamiliar equipment, examining the wooden frames laced with rawhide webbing. She had seen others in the camp using similar devices, but had never attempted it herself. "Why today?" she asked, following Singing Star toward the edge of camp. The old woman gestured toward the vast expanse of untouched snow stretching toward distant pines. "Because you cannot remain forever. In camp, must learn to move beyond walls." There was something in her tone that suggested more than a simple survival lesson. Before Lizzie could question further, 2 hawks appeared, similarly equipped for travel. "My grandson will teach you," Singing Star explained. "He walks well on snow, like his name suggests." With that cryptic statement, she left them, returning to her teepee, where a group of young girls awaited instruction in medicinal herbs. 2 hawks nodded in greeting. "Ready?" "I doubt it," Lizzie replied honestly, "but I'll try." He demonstrated how to secure the bindings around her moccasins, then showed her the proper stride, a slightly wider gait than normal walking, with a smooth rolling motion that kept the snowshoe level. Her first attempts were predictably awkward. She stumbled repeatedly, face-planting in the snow to 2 hawks' poorly concealed amusement. Yet with each fall, she rose more determined than before, gradually finding the rhythm of this new mode of travel. "Good," 2 hawks approved as she completed a small circuit without falling. Natural movement comes with practice. They ventured farther from camp, following the frozen shoreline of Spirit Lake. The day was windless, the sun casting diamond sparkles across the snow's crust. Despite the cold, Lizzie found herself warming with exertion, her breath forming great plumes in the frigid air. "Why did your grandmother insist on this lesson today?" she asked as they paused to rest on a fallen log. 2 hawks was silent for a moment, gazing out across the frozen expanse. "Scouts reported riders yesterday," he said finally. "White men, 3 days' journey south." The information hit Lizzie like a physical blow. Blackwood? Perhaps. Or army? Or trappers? Two Hawks shrugged. Cannot know yet, but grandmother believes you should prepare. Prepare to leave? The thought of abandoning the tentative security she had found sent a spike of fear through her chest. Prepare for all possibilities. Two Hawks met her gaze directly. Council promised protection until spring. But if Sheriff comes before then, with many men, with guns. He didn't need to finish the thought. The council had been clear about this condition of her sanctuary. They would not risk war for one woman. I understand, Lizzie said quietly. Your grandmother is wise to think ahead. Two Hawks nodded, seemingly relieved by her lack of protest. Snowshoes may save your life if time comes to travel quickly through winter mountains. And until then, you live, you learn, you wait. He rose, extending a hand to help her up. Come, more practice. They continued along the lakeshore, gradually increasing pace as Lizzie grew more confident with the snowshoes. Two Hawks pointed out animal tracks in the snow, teaching her to differentiate between deer, elk, fox, and rabbit. He showed her which evergreen trees provided edible needles rich in vitamins and how to recognize the subtle bumps in the snow that indicated nutritious roots beneath. It was the longest time they had spent alone together since their initial journey to Spirit Lake, and Lizzie found herself studying him with new awareness. The month among his people had given her insight into the man behind the stoic exterior. She had learned that he was respected as a hunter, but somewhat controversial for his willingness to interact with white society. His time in government school had marked him as different, valuable as a translator and cultural bridge, but viewed with wariness by traditionalists. Your people have mixed feelings about you, she observed as they turned back toward camp. Two Hawks raised an eyebrow. You see much for outsider. I listen, I watch. Lizzie navigated around a snow-laden branch. They respect your skills, but worry about your time among whites. Yes. He accepted the assessment without defensiveness. Some believe white ways contaminate Lakota spirit. Others see value in knowing enemies' thinking. And what do you believe? Two Hawks considered the question with his characteristic thoughtfulness. I believe survival requires adaptation. Lakota have always changed with seasons, with challenges. This is greatest challenge we have faced. It was the most he had ever shared of his personal philosophy, and Lizzie recognized the significance of his openness. Thank you, she said simply, for trusting me with your thoughts. He acknowledged her words with a slight inclination of his head. As they approached the outskirts of camp, he paused, turning to face her. Lizzie! It was the first time he had used her name directly, and something in his tone caused her to look up sharply. If riders come, if you must leave quickly, there is place you could go. Abandoned mission, 1 day north, stone building, safe from winter. The fact that he had considered an escape route for her, had thought about her safety beyond tribal obligations, touched Lizzie deeply. Thank you, she said again, the words carrying more weight than before. Two Hawks nodded once, then continued toward camp, the moment of connection passing, but not forgotten. That evening, as the tribe gathered for the evening meal, standing, Bear made an announcement that sent a ripple of excitement through the assembly. Due to increasingly harsh weather, the traditional winter ceremony would be held the following night, earlier than usual. Two Hawks translated for Lizzie, explaining the significance of the event. A sacred gathering to honor ancestors, give thanks for survival thus far, and seek protection through the remaining winter months. All Lakota participate, he explained. Much preparation tomorrow. Indeed, the next day saw the entire camp transformed by purposeful activity. Women prepared special foods and arranged ceremonial displays in the center of camp. Men crafted or repaired ritual items and rehearsed songs that had been passed down through generations. Even the children had roles, gathering specific types of kindling for the sacred fire and practicing dances under the watchful eyes of elders. Lizzie found herself working alongside Swift Fox, helping to prepare a mixture of cornmeal, dried cherries, and venison fat that would be offered during the ceremony. "Will I be allowed to attend?" she asked, uncertain of her place during such an important tribal event. Swift Fox looked surprised by the question. "Of course. All in camp must participate. Good spirits protect all who honor them." She hesitated, then added, "But some parts. Private, for Lakota only. You understand?" "Of course," Lizzie assured her. "I'm honored to witness what I'm permitted to see." Swift Fox smiled, evidently relieved. "Two Hawks says you have good heart. Open mind, not like most Wasichu." The Lakota word for whites was pronounced without malice, simply as a statement of fact. Lizzie had heard it often enough to recognize it, along with a growing vocabulary of basic Lakota words she had absorbed through daily interactions. "Two Hawks said that?" she asked, trying to sound casual while feeling an unexpected warmth at the compliment. Swift Fox nodded, her eyes twinkling with something that looked suspiciously like mischief. "He watches you. Not obvious, but I see." Before Lizzie could formulate a response, Grass Dancer called Swift Fox away for another task, leaving Lizzie to ponder this new information with mixed emotions. She had not allowed herself to consider any future beyond immediate survival, certainly not one that might include deeper connections with anyone in the tribe. Yet Swift Fox's observations stirred something she had thought frozen by her experiences with Blackwood: the capacity to feel attraction, to imagine intimacy based on respect rather than possession. She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the preparations that continued throughout the day. By late afternoon, the entire camp buzzed with anticipation. Children were scrubbed clean despite the cold, and adults donned their finest clothing, decorated with intricate beadwork and ceremonial symbols. Singing Star presented Lizzie with a simple dress of soft deer hide, adorned with minimal but elegant quill work. "For ceremony," she explained, "not proper to wear dead husband's clothes to honor spirits." Lizzie blinked in surprise, both at the gift and at Singing Star's characterization of Blackwood. "He's not dead," she pointed out. The old woman's eyes twinkled with unexpected humor. "To you, he should be. Dead and buried in past." Her expression grew more serious. "New life requires leaving old one behind completely." It was wisdom Lizzie couldn't argue with. She accepted the dress gratefully, touched by the inclusion it represented. As she changed in the privacy of Singing Star's teepee, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a polished metal mirror, one of the few manufactured items the old woman possessed. The woman who looked back at her bore little resemblance to the prim schoolteacher who had arrived in Copper Creek nearly a year ago. Her face had grown leaner, tanned by exposure despite the winter season. Her auburn hair, once carefully styled, according to Boston fashion, now hung in simple braids. Her posture, her expressions, even the calluses on her hands told the story of transformation more eloquently than words. She was not Lakota, would never be Lakota, yet neither was she the same Elizabeth Montgomery who had fled west seeking adventure and independence. She existed in a space between worlds, no longer fully belonging to either, yet carrying elements of both. As dusk fell, the ceremony began. The entire tribe gathered around a massive central fire, arranged in a circle that reflected their connection to each other and to the natural world. Standing Bear and other elders took positions of honor nearest the fire, with families grouped behind them according to kinship and status. Singing Star guided Lizzie to a place beside her, close enough to observe, but positioned in a way that acknowledged her outsider status. Two Hawks sat with the hunters to their right, his profile strong in the firelight. He had painted his face with simple red and black designs that emphasized his high cheekbones and straight nose. Like the other men, he wore his finest clothing, a shirt decorated with porcupine quill work, leggings adorned with beaded patterns, and a single eagle feather secured in his hair. The ceremony itself was more complex and beautiful than Lizzie had anticipated. It began with the lighting of a sacred pipe, which was passed among the tribal leaders with great solemnity. Standing Bear then spoke at length in Lakota, his deep voice rising and falling with the rhythms of ancient tradition. Though Lizzie couldn't understand most of his words, the reverence with which they were received conveyed their importance. Next came songs, some performed by elders alone, others joining the entire tribe in powerful harmonies that seemed to rise directly from the earth beneath them. The melodies were unlike anything in Lizzie's experience, complex in structure yet primal in their emotional impact. They spoke of struggle and survival, of connection to ancestors and to the land itself. Dancers entered the circle in groups, determined by age and gender. Young girls moved with delicate precision, their steps mimicking the flight of butterflies or the gentle sway of prairie grasses. Boys enacted hunting scenes, their movements transforming from human to animal and back again with startling accuracy. Adult dancers performed more complex rituals, telling stories of creation, warfare, and spiritual journeys through choreography passed down through countless generations. Throughout it all, Lizzie observed with wonder and humility. This was a culture as rich and complex as any she had encountered in Boston society, yet one that white civilization had dismissed as primitive and savage. The sophistication of the ceremony, its intricate symbolism, its careful balance of roles, its connection to history and environment, revealed a depth of tradition that had survived despite generations of oppression. When the communal portions of the ceremony concluded, Singing Star touched Lizzie's arm gently. "Now comes part for Lakota only," she explained. "You return to Teepee. Tomorrow we will speak of what you may learn from what you saw." Lizzie nodded, rising to leave as directed. As she made her way through the darkness toward Singing Star's dwelling, she heard the drumming change rhythm, signaling the beginning of the private rituals from which she was excluded. Far from feeling rejected, she appreciated the boundaries that allowed the Lakota to maintain their sacred traditions, while still permitting her to witness what they were willing to share. In the teepee, she stoked the small fire and settled onto her sleeping mat, listening to the distant sounds of singing and drumming. The day's activities had left her physically tired but mentally alert, her thoughts cycling through all she had experienced since arriving at Spirit Lake. The hide covering the entrance rustled, and two hawks stepped inside. Lizzie sat up in surprise. He had never entered Singing Star's teepee while she was alone there. "Is something wrong?" she asked, noting the tension in his bearing. Two hawks shook his head. "Nothing wrong, but important news." He settled cross-legged near the fire, his expression serious in the flickering light. Hunter returned during ceremony, man who was scouting south. Lizzie's pulse quickened. "And? Riders are definitely searching. 6 men, well armed." He held her gaze steadily. "One matches Blackwood's description." The name sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter night. "How far?" 2 days, perhaps less if weather holds." Two hawks added a small branch to the fire. "They follow River Valley. Logic path for anyone traveling north. Will pass within half-day's ride of our camp." Lizzie absorbed this information, her mind racing through implications. "The council, do they know?" "Not yet. We'll meet at dawn." His dark eyes reflected the firelight as he studied her reaction. "Some will say you must go, others may argue for hiding you until they pass." The unspoken third option hung between them, that she might be turned over to Blackwood to preserve the tribe's safety. The council had been clear about this possibility from the beginning. She had accepted the condition then. But now, after weeks of building a new life among these people, the prospect of returning to Blackwood's control filled her with bone-deep dread. "What does your grandmother think?" Lizzie asked, knowing Singing Star's influence within the tribe. "She is still in ceremony, has not heard news." Two Hawks hesitated, then added, "But she has prepared for this possibility. The dress she gave. It is made for travel. The moccasins, the leggings, all chosen for someone who might need to move quickly, stay warm in deep winter." The revelation didn't surprise Lizzie. Singing Star's foresight was legendary within the tribe. "And you? What do you think I should do?" Two Hawks was silent for a long moment, the question clearly touching on conflicting loyalties. "I think," he began slowly, "I think woman. Who escaped cruel husband once can do so again, if necessary, but this time with better preparation, better knowledge." It wasn't a direct answer, yet it conveyed his belief in her capabilities, a vote of confidence rather than a specific plan of action. There was respect in his assessment, respect that warmed Lizzie despite the chilling news. "Thank you for warning me," she said finally. "I'll be ready for whatever the council decides." Two Hawks nodded, rising to leave. At the entrance he paused, looking back at her. "Lizzie," he said, using her name with a gentle emphasis that caught her attention. "Whatever happens, you are not alone this time." With that, he was gone, slipping into the night as silently as he had arrived. Yet his words remained, wrapping around Lizzie like a protective blanket. "You are not alone this time." Such a simple statement, but one that carried profound meaning for a woman who had spent most of her life feeling fundamentally isolated, even in the midst of Boston society, even in her marriage. She lay back on her sleeping mat, listening as the ceremonial drums gradually fell silent across the camp. Sleep would be elusive tonight, her mind too busy processing the implications of Blackwood's approach. Yet beneath the anxiety lay a surprising bedrock of determination. She had survived his cruelty once. She had crossed a wilderness in winter. She had earned a place, however tenuous, among people who had every reason to reject her. Whatever came next, she would face it with the strength she had discovered within herself, a strength that had always been there, waiting for circumstances desperate enough to call it forth. Dawn arrived with moody indecision, the sky a canvas of shifting grays as snow clouds gathered on the horizon. The camp stirred to life slowly, the previous night's ceremony having continued late into the darkness. Lizzie rose early, dressing carefully in the garments Singing Star had provided, the travel-ready dress, sturdy leggings, and fur-lined moccasins designed for winter journeys. Singing Star returned as Lizzie was braiding her hair. The old woman's face showed fatigue from the night's rituals, but her eyes remained sharp and alert. "You have heard news," she observed, noting Lizzie's practical attire. "Two Hawks told me Blackwood is close." Singing Star nodded, unsurprised. "Council meets soon. Standing Bear has called all elders." She studied Lizzie with her penetrating gaze. "You prepare for leaving. This is wise." "I don't want to endanger your people," Lizzie said simply. "You've shown me more kindness than I had any right to expect." Something softened in the old woman's expression. Kindness is not measured by right or expectation. It flows where needed, like water seeking low ground. She reached into a hide and pouch and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft leather. "For you. May help in days ahead." Lizzie accepted the bundle, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a beautifully crafted knife with a bone handle. The blade was shorter than a hunting, a knife but razor sharp, its edge glinting in the morning light. "Woman's knife," Singing Star explained, "for cutting hide, preparing food, or for protection if spirits will it so." The gift clearly held significance beyond its practical value. Lizzie ran her finger carefully along the flat of the blade, feeling the smooth polish of expert craftsmanship. "I don't know how to thank you. Use it well. That is thanks enough." Singing Star moved toward the teepee entrance. "I go to council. Wait here. Decision will come soon." Left alone, Lizzie completed her preparations with methodical care. She gathered the few possessions she could call her own. The knife Singing Star had given her, a small pouch of dried meat and pemmican she had prepared. Days earlier, extra moccasin liners and a fire-starting kit 2 hawks had taught her to use. Everything else, the sleeping mat, cooking implements, even the clothing she had arrived in, belonged to the tribe. She had just finished securing these modest belongings when Swift Fox burst into the teepee, her young face flushed with excitement and distress. "They come!" she exclaimed, her English fractured in her agitation. "Men on horses from south, 6, like Scout said." Lizzie's blood ran cold. How close? Ridge above river, less than 1 hour. Swift Fox grabbed Lizzie's hands. "Council, still talking, arguing. Some say hide you, some say you must go." The tribe's internal division didn't surprise Lizzie. Despite the wary acceptance she had earned, her presence remained controversial, especially in the face of direct confrontation with white authority. "What about your brother? Where is 2 hawks?" Swift Fox's expression grew troubled. "Gone. Since dawn. Took grandfather's fast horse. No one knows where." She squeezed Lizzie's hands tightly. "You were a good friend to me, taught me English words, listened to my stories I will not forget." The farewell in her words was unmistakable. Before Lizzie could respond, Running Fox appeared in the teepee entrance, his imposing figure blocking the morning light. His expression was grim, but not hostile as he addressed Lizzie directly. "Sheriff's men approach. Council has decided." He gestured outside. "Come. Standing Bear will speak to you." The moment of reckoning had arrived. Lizzie gathered her small bundle of possessions and followed Running Fox through the camp, aware of eyes watching from every teepee. Children who had recently begun to smile at her now huddled behind their mothers. Men stood in protective stances near family dwellings. The atmosphere hummed with tension, a community preparing for potential conflict. Standing Bear waited in the central gathering area, flanked by other tribal elders, including Singing Star. His weathered face was solemn as Lizzie approached and stood before him, straightening her spine in an unconscious echo of her first appearance before the council. "Lakota people have offered shelter through winter," he began, his deep voice carrying across the suddenly silent camp. "But white men bring guns, bring threat to our children. Council has spoken." He paused, his dark eyes meeting Lizzie's directly. "You must leave camp before they arrive." Though expected, the words still landed like a physical blow. Lizzie nodded, accepting the inevitable. "I understand. I'm grateful for all you've taught me." Standing Bear raised a hand, indicating he hadn't finished. "Singing Star says you have learned well. Shows respect for our ways. This counts much with council." He glanced toward the southern horizon, where dust might soon mark the approach of Blackwood's party. "We will not tell Sheriff you were here. We'll send him east toward mountains, give you chance to travel north." It was more than Lizzie had dared hope for, not just release from the camp, but active misdirection of her pursuers. The council was offering not simply neutrality, but alliance, however limited. "Thank you," she said, the simple words inadequate for the emotion behind them. "I won't forget your kindness." Singing Star stepped forward then, addressing the gathered tribe in Lakota. Though Lizzie couldn't understand the specific words, the old woman's tone carried authority and conviction. When she finished, several of the tribe's best hunters moved forward, including Running Fox. Standing Bear explained to Lizzie, "Hunters will escort you part way. Ensure safe start on Northern Trail. Then you continue alone to place 2 hawks spoke of." the abandoned mission. Two hawks must have shared this suggestion with the council. Lizzie nodded, fighting back unexpected tears at this final evidence of the tribe's protection. As preparations for her departure accelerated, Singing Star drew Lizzie aside for a final private word. "Two hawks not here to say goodbye," the old woman observed. "This troubles you." It did, though Lizzie was reluctant to admit how much. "I would have liked to thank him for everything." Singing Star's lined face revealed nothing of her thoughts. Sometimes words not needed between those who understand each other's hearts. She pressed a small medicine pouch into Lizzie's hand. "For journey, contains healing herbs, may be useful." The practical gift was characteristic of the old woman's approach to life. Pragmatic, yet deeply thoughtful. Lizzie secured it carefully alongside her other meager possessions. Would the Lakota's misdirection succeed in sending him east while she remained hidden to the north? Or would he somehow divine her true location through the tracking skills he was known for? The questions circled like hungry wolves, offering no answers, but gnawing at her fragile sense of security. She reminded herself firmly that she had done everything possible to cover her trail, just as two hawks had taught her. The heavy snowfall would further obscure any tracks. The mission's location, in a small valley surrounded by dense pine forest, made it difficult to spot from a distance. Still, she knew better than to underestimate Blackwood's determination. His pursuit wasn't simply about reclaiming a runaway wife. It was about maintaining his authority, his reputation as a man not to be defied. Her escape had challenged his power in a way that he could never tolerate. He would hunt her with the relentless focus of a predator, not because he valued her, but because he couldn't allow her to escape his control. The thought should have terrified her, yet Lizzie found herself responding with cold resolve rather than fear. She checked Singing Star's knife, ensuring it remained sharp and accessible. She mentally reviewed the mission's layout, identifying defensive positions and potential escape routes. She calculated how long her supplies would last if rationed carefully. In Boston, such tactical thinking would have been considered unladylike at best, deranged at worst. In Copper Creek, Blackwood had systematically crushed any hint of strategic independence. Yet here, alone in an abandoned mission with only her wits between her and disaster, Lizzie embraced the clarity that came with acknowledging harsh reality. The stark truth was that she might need to fight, physically fight, for her freedom and possibly her life. The woman who had boarded a train east with gloved hands and proper luggage would have found the idea incomprehensible. The woman who now checked escape routes and tested the balance of her knife accepted it as simply another aspect of frontier survival. Night settled fully over the mission, the darkness outside absolute in the way only wilderness nights could be. Lizzie stretched out on her makeshift bed, one hand near her knife, ears attuned to any sound that didn't belong to the creaking building or the persistent wind. Despite her vigilance, exhaustion from the day's journey soon pulled her into uneasy sleep. She dreamed of Copper Creek, of standing before her classroom of children while Blackwood watched from the doorway, his eyes cold with calculation. In the dream, she tried to warn the children of danger, but no sound emerged from her mouth. When she turned back to the doorway, Blackwood had been replaced by two hawks, his expression unreadable as he extended a hand toward her. Lizzie woke with a start, momentarily disoriented in the absolute darkness. Something had disturbed her sleep, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the settling building. She lay perfectly still, controlling her breathing as two hawks had taught her, listening intently to the night. There it came again, a soft scrape against stone, as of a cautious footstep in the chapel. Someone was inside the mission. Moving with deliberate silence, Lizzie slipped from her bed, knife in hand. The small room had only one door, which she had left slightly ajar to allow warmer air from the kitchen stove to circulate. Now that opening represented both vulnerability and her only escape route. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by the faint creak of floorboards. Whoever had entered was moving toward the priest's quarters, toward her. Lizzie flattened herself against the wall beside the door, knife raised, heart thundering in her chest. If Blackwood had found her, she would not be taken without resistance. She might not prevail against his superior strength, but she would. Ensure he remembered the encounter for the rest of his days. A shadow darkened the doorway. Lizzie tensed, prepared to strike as a figure pushed the door open wider. In the faint light from dying embers in the distant stove, she caught the outline of a man, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the distinctive silent grace she had come to recognize. "Two hawks," she whispered, lowering the knife in stunned disbelief. The figure froze, then turned slowly toward her. Lizzie? It was him, unmistakably him, despite being bundled against the cold, a dusting of snow still clinging to his shoulders and hair. Relief crashed through her with such force that her knees nearly buckled. "I could have killed you," she said, the tremor in her voice belying her attempt at calm. Two Hawk's teeth flashed white in the darkness, an unexpected smile. "Good. Means you learned well." He glanced at the knife still in her hand. "Grandmother's gift serves you already." He moved further into the room, bringing with him the sharp scent of pine and winter air. Only now did Lizzie notice he carried several bundles, supplies of some kind. "What are you doing here?" she asked, still struggling to process his sudden appearance. "How did you find me?" "Told you about this place," he replied simply, as if that explained everything. "When council decided you must leave, I came ahead, prepared shelter." He gestured to his bundles, brought food, more blankets, winter still long. The matter-of-fact explanation stunned Lizzie. While the tribal council debated, while Blackwood approached with his men, two Hawks had quietly slipped away to ensure she would have what she needed to survive at the mission. It was an act of such practical kindness, so characteristic of his understated way, that she found herself momentarily speechless. "Running Fox said you left at dawn," she managed finally. "You've been here all this time, preparing for me." Two Hawks nodded, beginning to unpack his bundles in the practical way that defined him. Fixed roof over this room, gathered more wood, checked stove, cleared chimney. He opened a leather pouch, revealing strips of dried meat. Hunted, too. Better than pemmican only. The simple list of preparations represented hours of labor, all undertaken without certainty that she would even reach the mission safely. Lizzie watched him arranging supplies with efficient movements. This man, who had repeatedly placed himself at risk for her welfare, without any obligation to do so. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why help me this way? Your people already did more than I could have expected." Two Hawks paused, giving the question his customary careful consideration. "Many reasons," he said finally. "Practical ones. You needed help to survive winter alone. Less practical ones." He hesitated, seemingly searching for words. "You faced Blackwood's cruelty, chose freedom instead of safety. Reminds me of my people. Different struggle, same courage." It was perhaps the longest explanation he had ever offered her, and Lizzie sensed there was more beneath the words than he expressed directly. Before she could respond, he continued, "We'll stay tonight. Make sure mission secure. Tomorrow return. To tribe." His tone made it a statement, not a question or suggestion. "Is that safe?" Lizzie asked. "Won't they notice you're gone?" "Told Running Fox I scout north trails. Not unusual for me." A hint of that rare smile appeared again. "Brother disapproves, but will cover absence." The revelation that Running Fox was complicit in this plan surprised Lizzie. The older brother had never shown her anything but suspicion and reluctant tolerance. "Running Fox knows you're helping." "Me?" Two Hawks nodded. "Not happy about it, says I risk too much for Wasichu woman." He shrugged slightly. "But respects my choice. We'll say I am hunting if questions come. There was loyalty beneath Running Fox's stern exterior then. Loyalty to his brother even when disagreeing with his decisions. Another layer of complexity in these people who had entered her life so unexpectedly. They worked together to arrange the supplies Two Hawks had brought. In addition to food and blankets, he had included practical items that revealed his thoughtful planning. A better knife than the small one Singing Star had given her, a mended cooking pot, several carefully wrapped parcels of herbs for medicine and flavoring, even a repaired pair of snowshoes to replace the cruder ones she had used thus far. This will last until spring thaw, if careful, he explained, indicating the provisions. Once moon changes, days grow longer. Hunting easier then. The assessment was practical, but carried an underlying assumption that made Lizzie pause. You expect me to stay here until spring, alone? Two Hawks met her gaze directly. Safest option. Blackwood will search through winter, but focus on larger settlements when trail goes cold. By spring, perhaps lose interest. They both knew the last part was unlikely. Blackwood's pride would ensure he never truly abandoned the search for his runaway wife. Yet the basic strategy was sound. Disappear completely until the initial hunt lost momentum, then perhaps find a way farther north or west, beyond his influence. What about after? Lizzie asked, the question carrying more weight than its simple phrasing suggested. Two Hawks seemed to understand the deeper inquiry. Future has many paths, he said carefully. When spring comes, choice is open. Perhaps go to Montana Territory or Dakota settlements where Sheriff has no power. Perhaps. He hesitated, then finished with deliberate neutrality. Perhaps other possibilities. The unspoken option hung between them, that she might find a place with the Lakota more permanently, not merely as a temporary refugee, but as someone who had chosen their way of life. It was a possibility neither of them could voice explicitly, fraught as it was with cultural barriers and practical complications. Instead, Two Hawks changed the subject, showing her improvements he had made to the mission's kitchen area and explaining how to maintain the temperamental stove. Lizzie followed his instructions attentively, grateful for the practical focus that allowed both of them to set aside more complicated questions. They shared a simple meal of dried meat and roots. Two Hawks had brought, sitting near the stove as snow continued to fall outside, occasionally audible against the buildings, stone walls. The companionable silence between them felt comfortable now, no longer the wary quiet of strangers, but the easy peace of those who had faced danger together and developed understanding beyond words. How will you find your way back in this weather? Lizzie asked eventually, glancing toward the single window where darkness and snow created an impenetrable curtain. Know these lands since boyhood? Two Hawks replied with quiet confidence. Can find way by feel of wind, shape of land under snow. He added a small branch to the fire. But we'll wait until storm passes, probably tomorrow. The acknowledgement that he would remain overnight brought practical considerations. You should take the bed, Lizzie offered. I can sleep here by the stove. Two Hawks shook his head. You take bed. I keep watch first, then rest here. His tone suggested the arrangement was not open to negotiation. Lizzie didn't argue. Despite her growth in confidence and capability, she recognized Two Hawks' superior experience in wilderness survival. If he believed a watch was necessary, she would trust his judgment. As she prepared to retire to the priest's quarters, gathering one of the new blankets he had brought, Lizzie paused in the doorway. Thank you, she said simply, not just for the supplies, for everything since we first met. Two Hawks acknowledged her gratitude with a slight inclination of his head. Sleep well. Tomorrow we plan more carefully. Morning arrived with blinding brilliance, sunlight reflecting off fresh snow with eye-watering intensity. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts and ice-jeweled trees. Lizzie rose to find two hawks already awake, tending the stove and preparing a simple breakfast from their supplies. "Storm good for you," he observed as she joined him. "Covers all tracks completely. Makes mission harder to find." The observation was reassuring, though Lizzie had learned enough about Blackwood's tenacity to maintain a healthy caution. "Do you think he's still searching the area around Spirit Lake?" "Probably." Two hawks handed her a cup of hot herbal tea, another thoughtful provision he had brought. "Council sent him eastward. Men like him follow most obvious trail first, only backtrack when certainty fails." His assessment matched her own understanding of Blackwood's methods. The sheriff was relentless but not particularly imaginative. He would exhaust obvious possibilities before considering alternatives, especially if those alternatives contradicted his preconceptions. A white woman seeking refuge with Indians would seem implausible to him, which gave her temporary advantage. "I need to learn more," Lizzie said, sipping the tea thoughtfully. "About surviving alone, about hunting small game, about finding food when supplies run low." Two hawks nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. We have today before I return. We'll show most important skills." They spent the morning in practical instruction, beginning with a thorough examination of the mission's defensive strengths and weaknesses. Two hawks showed her how to secure the main door more effectively, which windows offered the best observation points, where to position herself if threatened. He never directly mentioned Blackwood, but the implicit premise of their preparations was clear. She needed to be ready if discovery came. Next came hunting lessons. Though Lizzie had observed the basics during her time with the Lakota, she had never actually set and checked traps herself. Under Two Hawks' patient guidance, she learned to identify promising locations, to use the environment's natural features, to create snares from available materials. "Small game better for woman alone," he explained as they checked to practice. "Snare," he had set, "less dangerous to hunt, easier to prepare, wastes less meat." By midday, Lizzie had successfully set 3 different types of traps and understood the principles behind each. She had also learned to identify several winter plants that remained edible beneath the snow, knowledge that might prove critical if her supplies dwindled before spring brought new growth. They returned to the mission for a brief meal after, which Two Hawks taught her how to maintain and improve her snowshoes, repair tears in clothing, and preserve meat for longer storage. Each skill built upon what she had observed at Spirit Lake, but now with focused attention to what a solitary woman would need most. As afternoon light began to fade, Lizzie realized their time was growing short. Two Hawks would need to leave soon if he intended to make significant progress toward Spirit Lake before darkness made travel dangerous. A peculiar melancholy settled over her at the thought of returning to complete solitude after this brief, intense period of companionship. "And learning. One more thing to show you," Two Hawks said, apparently oblivious to her shift in mood. He led her to a section of the chapel wall where loose stones created a small, unobtrusive cavity. Hidden place for most valuable items. He demonstrated how to access the hiding spot, explaining that such niches were common in old stone buildings, often created by priests to conceal valuables during uncertain times. Good for knife, fire-starting tools, anything you cannot lose. Lizzie practiced opening and closing the hidden cache, appreciating the practical security it offered. As she returned the stones to their innocuous-seeming position, she finally voiced the question that had been building throughout the day. "Will you come back?" The query emerged more vulnerable than she had intended, revealing the depth of her concern about facing the remainder of winter entirely alone. Two Hawks considered the question with his usual seriousness. "We'll try," he said finally. "Not soon." 2. Dangerous with Blackwood searching, but before spring thaw, yes. His dark eyes held hers steadily. Promise. It was the first time he had offered her a direct promise, and Lizzie understood its significance. 2 Hawks did not give his word lightly. If he said he would return, he would move mountains to do so. "I'll hold you to that," she replied, attempting to match his pragmatic tone while conveying her own commitment. The moment stretched between them, weighted with things neither could express directly. Then 2 Hawks nodded once, decisively, and moved toward his minimal traveling gear. Should leave now, use remaining light to find safe camp. Lizzie followed him to the mission's entrance, where he shouldered his small pack and secured his snowshoes. The practical preparations couldn't disguise the significance of the moment. Once again, their paths were diverging. She to isolated waiting, he to return to his people. "Remember what I taught," 2 Hawks said, adjusting a leather strap with unnecessary attention. "Be cautious, be patient." "I will," Lizzie promised. "Take care on your journey back." He nodded, then surprised her by removing something from inside his buckskin shirt, a small object wrapped in soft hide. "Almost forgot, from Singing Star." Lizzie accepted the bundle, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a beautifully crafted stone pendant on a leather cord. The smooth river stone had been painted with the same star pattern that adorned Singing Star's teepee. "Protection symbol," 2 Hawks explained. "Grandmother says it watches over travelers, guides them home." The unexpected gift touched Lizzie deeply. Despite the council's decision that she must leave for the tribe's safety, Singing Star had sent this personal token of concern and spiritual protection. It represented a connection that transcended the practical necessities of survival. "Please, thank her for me," Lizzie said, her voice thick with emotion as she slipped the pendant over her head. "Tell her I will honor its meaning." 2 Hawks nodded, his eyes lingering on the pendant now resting against her collar. "Grandmother sees far," he said cryptically. Then, with a final nod of farewell, he turned and moved away from the mission, his figure soon blending with the snowy landscape and winter shadows. Lizzie watched until he disappeared completely, then secured the mission door against the gathering dusk. Alone once more, she moved through the building, checking each room with the methodical attention 2 Hawks had taught her. The space, already, felt different. Not the abandoned shell she had discovered yesterday, but a temporary home equipped for survival. The weeks that followed tested Lizzie in ways she could never have imagined during her sheltered Boston upbringing. Winter tightened its grip on the land, bringing storms that buried the mission in drifts high enough to block the lower windows. Temperatures plummeted so severely that moisture from her breath froze on the blankets as she slept. On the worst days, she remained inside, rationing firewood and food with careful precision, reading and rereading the single book she had found in the priest's quarters, a weathered Bible with margin notes in a spidery hand. Yet there were moments of unexpected beauty as well. Mornings when the sun transformed the snow-covered valley into a sea of diamonds. Nights when the aurora borealis danced across the sky in curtains of green and purple light. The triumph of finding her first snared rabbit. The small victory of coaxing more heat from the temperamental stove. The quiet satisfaction of mastering skills that would have seemed impossible months earlier. She thought often of 2 Hawks during these solitary days and nights. Sometimes the memories were practical, recalling his instructions on setting traps or reading weather signs. Other times they were more personal. The rare smile that transformed his stoic features, the quiet respect in his voice when he spoke of her courage, the gentle way he had wrapped her injured hand after she cut herself on a broken window. Lizzie found herself touching Singing Star's pendant frequently, drawing comfort from the connection it represented to both grandmother and grandson. The painted star pattern had begun to fade slightly from constant contact with her skin, as if the symbol were gradually being absorbed into her very being. February brought a brief thaw that threatened the mission with flooding before temperatures plunged again, turning the melted snow to treacherous ice. March arrived with fierce winds that howled around the stone walls like restless spirits. Through it all, Lizzie endured, growing leaner and tougher with each passing week, her city-bred sensibilities replaced by wilderness pragmatism. She had just finished checking her traps on a surprisingly mild late March afternoon when she spotted tracks in the melting snow near the mission's entrance. Human tracks, too large to be her own, leading directly to the door. For a heart-stopping moment, fear paralyzed her. Blackwood. Had he somehow traced her here after all these months? She retreated to the forest edge, studying the mission carefully for signs of intrusion or danger. The door remained secured as she had left it. No smoke rose from the chimney beyond what her morning fire had produced. No horses were visible in the surrounding area. Relief washed over her as realization dawned. The tracks belonged to two hawks. He had returned as promised, found her absent checking traps and moved on, perhaps intending to return later. The footprints were partially melted, suggesting he had been there within the past hour. Lizzie hurried toward the mission, eyes scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of him. She had nearly reached the door when movement caught her attention. A figure emerging from the trees to the west, moving with the distinctive flowing stride she would recognize anywhere. Two hawks, she called, abandoning caution in her excitement. He paused, then changed direction toward her, snowshoes slung over his shoulder in the milder conditions. As he drew closer, Lizzie noted changes in him. He seemed thinner, with new lines of fatigue around his eyes, but his movement remained strong and purposeful. "You returned," she said simply when he reached her, suddenly self-conscious about her earlier outburst. "Promised I would." His dark eyes moved over her, assessingly. "You survived well, look strong." It was perhaps the highest compliment he could offer, and Lizzie felt an unexpected flush of pride. "Your teachings helped. Come inside. I have rabbit stew from yesterday's hunt." Inside the mission, Two Hawks observed her improvements with quiet approval. The better sealed windows, the organized storage, the efficient arrangement of the living space. More than just surviving, Lizzie had created a functional home from the abandoned shell. Over the simple meal, he shared news from Spirit Lake. The tribe had weathered winter without major hardship. Game had been scarce, but sufficient. Singing. Star had fallen ill briefly, but recovered with her usual resilience. Running Fox's son, Eagle Feather, had shown remarkable skill in his first ceremonial hunt. Most importantly for Lizzie, Blackwood had indeed been misled by the council's direction. He and his men had searched east of Spirit Lake for nearly a week before weather forced them to return to civilization. There had been no sign of them since midwinter, though traders reported the sheriff remained determined to find his missing wife when spring allowed renewed search efforts. "Time grows short," Two Hawks concluded. "Blackwood will not forget. When trails clear, he will search again." "I've been thinking about that," Lizzie said, pouring more tea into his cup, "about what happens when spring comes fully." Two Hawks waited, giving her space to continue. In the months of isolation, Lizzie had reached certain conclusions, difficult ones that required voicing aloud to become real. "I can't go back east," she began carefully. "Not to Boston, not to any city, where Blackwood might eventually find me. And I can't stay in this territory, where his influence reaches too far." She met Two Hawks' gaze directly. "I've been studying the maps in the priest's desk. There's a settlement in Montana territory, beyond the mountains. Far enough from established. Law that a woman might disappear, start fresh." Two Hawks considered this. Long journey, dangerous crossing through mountains. I know, but possible. Lizzie leaned forward, intensity in her voice. I've grown stronger here, learned skills I never imagined. With proper preparation, I believe, I could make it. Something shifted in Two Hawks' expression, a mixture of respect and what might have been reluctance. Other options exist, he said carefully. Such as? He was silent for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words with unusual care. Lakota bands travel north in summer. Some go far beyond where white law reaches. Place called Grandmother's Country by my people. Canada by whites. The implication was clear. She might continue north with the Lakota rather than west alone. It was an alternative Lizzie had considered during her solitary contemplations, but had not dared to fully embrace, uncertain whether such a path would be open to her. Would that be possible? She asked, keeping her voice neutral. For me to travel with your people again? Two Hawks set down his cup deliberately. Singing Star has spoken to council many times through winter. Opinion shifts slowly, like great river changing course. He met her eyes directly. Some now say woman, who survived alone through winter, has Lakota spirit, regardless of skin. The statement carried profound significance. Not a guarantee of acceptance, but the suggestion that what had once seemed impossible might now be within reach. Lizzie felt her carefully maintained composure waver, emotion threatening to overwhelm. The practical demeanor she had cultivated through months of solitude. "And you?" she asked softly. "What do you say?" The question hung between them, pushing beyond the careful boundaries they had maintained through all their interactions. Two Hawks held her gaze, something unguarded in his expression for perhaps the first time since they had met. "I say paths that join in snow may find reason to remain together when thaw comes," he replied, his voice pitched low with meaning beyond. The words themselves, if both travelers wish it so. It was not a declaration of love, as a Boston suitor might have delivered it, with flowery phrases and theatrical gestures. Yet in its quiet sincerity, its acknowledgement of choice and mutual decision, it carried more genuine emotion than any conventional romance Lizzie had ever encountered. Her hand moved unconsciously to Singing Star's pendant, fingers tracing the familiar pattern as she considered her response. The path Two Hawks suggested would mean abandoning the last vestiges of her former identity, committing to a life so different from her upbringing that her parents would scarcely have recognized. The daughter in the woman she was becoming. Yet what waited in the other direction? Perpetual flight, constant vigilance, the endless fear of Blackwood's pursuit. Or if she somehow evaded him permanently, a life built on half-truths and hidden history, never able to speak openly of all she had experienced. "I would need to learn so much more," she said finally. "Your language, your customs, proper ways to contribute to the tribe." Two Hawks' expression warmed subtly, recognizing her response for the conditional acceptance. It was, "Learning never ends. I still Learn English words. You learn Lakota ways." He added with unexpected humor, "Fair trade." Lizzie found herself smiling, tension broken by his rare display of levity. "When would we leave? How would we proceed?" Not immediately," Two Hawks replied, returning to practicality. "Snow still blocks mountain passes. Lakota will not move until moon of green grass." He gestured to the mission around them. "Stay here until then. Safer. I will come when time approaches, guide you to summer gathering place." The plan was sensible, offering both immediate security and future possibility. Yet Lizzie hesitated, reluctant to return to complete isolation after this brief reconnection. "Must you leave again so soon? Could you not stay a day or two more?" Something softened in Two Hawks' expression. "Can stay until tomorrow." Told. Running Fox might be gone 3 days. Testing new hunting territories, good excuse. The simple concession meant more than Lizzie could express. One more day of companionship, of shared meals and conversation, of human connection after the endless solitude of winter. It was a gift beyond measure. They spent the remaining daylight hours checking and improving her traps, gathering early, spring herbs that had begun to emerge in sheltered spots, discussing preparations for the journey that lay ahead. As darkness fell and they returned to the mission, their conversation turned to deeper matters, her memories of Boston, his childhood among the Lakota before government schools and broken treaties, their shared observations of a world changing too rapidly for either of their peoples. They spoke more that evening than in all their previous time together, as if the tentative acknowledgement of deeper feelings had opened channels of communication previously closed by caution or circumstance. Yet still, they maintained a careful, physical distance, each aware of boundaries that could not yet be crossed, of commitments not fully made until her integration with the tribe was more secure. When morning came, Lizzie walked with two hawks to the edge of the clearing. The pendant, singing star, had given her visible now outside her clothing, rather than hidden beneath it. A symbol perhaps of a decision not yet finalized, but increasingly clear in her mind. 1 month, Two Hawks said, adjusting his pack. When dogwood blooms, I return. Be ready to travel then. I will, Lizzie promised. Then on impulse she reached out and briefly clasped his hand, the first deliberate physical contact she had initiated between them. Take care on your journey. Two Hawks looked momentarily startled, then squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Until dogwood blooms, he replied, the simple phrase carrying the weight of a vow. As he disappeared into the forest, Lizzie remained at the clearing's edge, watching long after his figure had blended with the trees and shadows. The path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with challenges she could only partially anticipate. Cultural differences, tribal politics, the ever-present threat of Blackwood's pursuit, all would need to be navigated with care. Yet as she turned back toward the mission, Lizzie felt something she had not experienced since fleeing Copper Creek. Not just determination to survive, but genuine hope for a future worth embracing rather than merely enduring. Whatever came, next, she would face it not as Elizabeth Montgomery, abandoned schoolteacher and fugitive wife, but as Lizzie, survivor of wilderness winter, potential adoptee of Lakota ways, woman of her own making. The wind shifted, carrying the subtle scent of thawing earth and distant pine. Spring approached, bringing with it the promise of renewal and difficult choices. For now, Lizzie had preparations to make, skills to practice, plans to refine. 1 month until dogwood bloomed. 1 month until Two Hawks returned. 1 month until the next chapter of a journey none of her Boston finishing school companions could have imagined. She touched Singing Star's pendant once more, drawing strength from its symbolism, then walked with steady purpose back to the mission. The woman who had once taught grammar to frontier children now moved with the confident stride of someone who had faced wilderness and isolation and discovered she was equal to both. Whatever the future held, she would meet it on her own terms, with clear eyes and an open heart. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.